Hello there! A while back I did a video looking back at Disney's direct-to-video sequels, and various people commented on which ones they themselves thought were solid sequels. And 3 titles were continually mentioned as good ones. So I gave these a look with an open mind, and in this special continuation I'll provide my brief thoughts on them. The first of these was Lilo Stitch 2. Taking place directly after the first film, it's not bad, I'll admit. The animation perfectly replicates the look of its predecessor, and the conflict with Stitch dealing with his self-destruction is interesting as it further goes into his creation. It even leads to a surprisingly emotional ending, even if they then go the cliched route a couple seconds later, and one we see a mile away. That said, it's in this part where Jumba shines, and David Ogden Stiers definitely got the best lines here. That said, the storyline about Lilo's hula competition isn't particularly riveting, and Pleakley's subplot seems added in to pad the time. There are some good laughs in it, and the voice cast is solid, even if there are times when it's obvious that's Dakota Fanning voicing Lilo. Is it necessary or required viewing? Not really, but I certainly enjoyed large parts of it, and certainly more than the television series, even if as a whole, Lilo & Stitch 2 is rather forgettable. Next is Bambi II, which was released over 60 years after the first film, a record for sequels. That said, it's one of the better direct-to-video sequels Disney did. I didn't like it as much as the Lion King ones, but it was certainly a noble effort. First of all, the animation is really beautiful, especially the backgrounds. They really managed to successfully have it look like the 1942 classic, which actually isn't too surprising considering legendary Disney animator Andreas Deja was an animation consultant, so Disney Toon definitely went out for the best. Now, technically this isn't a sequel, but rather a midquel that takes place directly after the death of Bambi's mother. It actually handles that aspect of the story very subtly without beating the audience over the head about its sadness, and the relationship between Bambi and his father is well played. The bits with Bambi playing with Thumper aren't quite as successful as we get unnecessary scenes like one with an agitated porcupine, and Thumper's voice grated on my nerves. It also lacks the subtle, realistic humor of the first one, going for cheaper, predictable slapstick gags instead. That said, the few times we see Flower the skunk, he steals the show. Nonetheless, the story works well, and if you were ever curious to find out what happens to Bambi after his mother's death and before adulthood, Bambi 2 is actually worth a look.
And the Great Prince of the Forest.
Actually, I was a lot like you.
Premiering on Disney DVD. Spring 2006.
Do you remember the story of a girl who lived a life of cinders? And how she found true love because she kept a beautiful dream in her heart? Of course, it helped that she had mouse friends who could sew and a fairy godmother who could do wonders with pumpkins. Well, that girl is me.
And finally, the third sequel I was recommended was Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time, which I didn't enjoy, I'm afraid. The animation is stale, the songs are forgettable, and though it only runs 74 minutes, it feels slow and padded. However, my biggest problem is the characters. Cinderella and Prince Charming were not the most fascinating characters in the first one, so they tried to give them more life here, but they're still somewhat lifeless, especially the prince. The stepmother also lacks what made her so frightening in the first Cinderella. While Ursula, Maleficent, and the Queen from Snow White are all great villains, it's the stepmother's lack of magic that made her so scary as we see her mind ticking and how to make Cindy's life worse and worse. Here, she gains magical powers and just says bibbidi bobbidi boo without much thought. Never mind that she never gives the evil stare. That said, the decision to make Anastasia, the stepsister, more sympathetic actually works. Usually I'm annoyed by characters going through extreme changes, but in this case it surprisingly works, with a lot of credit going to voice actress Tress MacNeille. In conclusion, Cinderella 3 was an interesting idea, but it just wasn't executed all that greatly, and I found myself bored through large sections of it. In conclusion, while Lilo & Stitch 2 and Bambi 2 are above average and almost enjoyable efforts, I still can't support the unnecessary direct-to-video sequel movement. Due to poor, below-average works like the Little Mermaid sequels, Lady and the Tramp 2, Pocahontas 2, Return to Jafar, Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, and yes, Cinderella 3. I know a lot of effort goes into these, but if the story isn't up to snuff and it doesn't add anything to the first one, they are still not worth watching. See you next time.
This perfectly perfect day, there is magic in the air. Gee, I wonder if that old lady has a wand that she could spare.